I already used the Carrie joke in my last review, so, use the Force, Tina? I don't know.
I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason.
Did you know that a young boy drowned?
Legend has it that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night, and he took his revenge. A revenge that he'll continue to seek if anyone ever enters his wilderness again.
After being chained down to the bottom of Camp Crystal Lake by his nemesis Tommy Jarvis, undead serial killer slash mama's boy Jason Voorhees is resurrected by a telepathic girl who's dealing with the guilt over her father's death. Welcome guys to my series review of the Friday the 13th movies. We've arrived at part 7. From what I can tell from the internet and online forums, it seems like this movie isn't very well liked. And for a lot of diehard fans actually, it seemed to signal the downward spiral that would continue, arguably, to this day for the franchise. So I'm going to get this out of the way right now, and that is the fact that I think this is a damn good horror movie. You can call the telepathic angle silly, I guess, but for the overtly supernatural direction that this series was going in, I honestly don't think it's that far-fetched. The question for me is, does this angle work on a dramatic level? Does it make for engaging storytelling? And for me, the answer is hell yes. We've had interesting characters in these movies. We've had some interesting plot directions in these movies, but I think for the first and perhaps only time, we have an actual enticing plot at the center of this movie. For one thing, we have great internal conflict for our lead. Not only does Tina have to deal with her powers and how they keep getting stronger and stronger, but she also has to deal with the fact that she, A, inadvertently caused the death of her father, and B, she accidentally resurrected Jason Voorhees from the dead, so she has so much baggage here. Now that's a lot of grief to give a final girl of this series, but this movie totally commits to it and it doesn't shy away from all of this emotional stuff at all. It's not a part 3 situation where they just threw in a backstory haphazardly. Tina's character and her motivations and her backstory are integral to this movie. And despite the obvious comparisons that we're all going to make, I do not think that Tina is a rip-off of Carrie. They're fundamentally different characters to me. They have entirely different backstories, they have entirely different motivations, so even though it's fun to joke around about that, I think it's unfair to say that this movie is Jason versus Carrie. In fact, I dare say that Tina's arc here more resembles a superhero movie. Think about it. The dead parent, the supervillain that she's responsible for, the powers which at first seem to be a curse until she has to use them at the right time to fight the villain at the end, it's all there. This is a superhero movie. No wonder I'm wearing my Superman colors. Granted, she's not a very good superhero because she doesn't really save a whole lot of people, but hey, you gotta have that body count, so blame the filmmakers more than anybody. And that is the weird thing about Part 7. The fact that the story and characters are so interesting to me that it feels like the slasher formula actually gets in the way. I'll admit, there is a significant chunk of this movie that loses me, that bores me, and that's the part where everybody's, running around, Jason's stalking these characters one by one, and we don't care for them at all. It's also obligatory and half-hearted, and that's not helped by the fact that the kills were compromised by the MPAA once again. Imagine all the amazing special effects work that just got left on the cutting room floor. And it's just because the MPAA doesn't like these movies. I mean, if it was Martin Scorsese behind the Friday the 13th movies, I think they would be a little bit more lenient. That being said though, the first couple times I watched this movie, I hardly noticed the fact that the kills were so neutered. Yeah, again, I'm not really paying attention to the kills here. I actually found myself so engaged with the story that I didn't really mind any of that stuff. And of course, people do complain about the characters in this movie and how they're such a step down, and for the most part, I definitely agree. These characters are pretty useless. But the characters aren't a total loss here. We get some really good ones, actually. There's Tina, of course, played wonderfully by Lar Park Lincoln, who brings ample amounts of vulnerability and strength to this role. My favorite moment of her performance is when she first sees Jason, and you can just see in her eyes the fact that she is deathly afraid, of course, but she also makes the decision to take on this guy, that she's going to use her powers for good. Then you have Terry Kiser playing Dr. Cruz, who is just such a smarmy and intolerable character that he just becomes entertaining to watch after a while, in my opinion. I really had fun seeing how far they were going to take this asshole, this schmuck, and obviously the payoff for that character Well, it would have been better if the kills weren't neutered again, but it's still pretty satisfying. And then you have Kevin Spiratus, I believe his name is, giving a very underrated performance here as Nick. I mean, I just don't know what to say. He's a genuinely nice guy, and we don't really get too many of those in these movies. Like, he's just such a sincerely caring person. Then I would be remiss if I did not mention Melissa, the quintessential character you love to hate, although this movie really has two of those. Melissa seems to be pretty divisive as a character, but I was sufficiently entertained by her bitchiness.
Hey, where do you think you're going?
I'm going back to bed. You want to come?
And the ending to her character arc, if you want to call it that was good stuff. Can we just rewind that? Just one more time. There we go, okay. Jason has never looked better. The makeup effects guys really outdid themselves with this design. If you're gonna do Zombie Jason, you should really go all out for that idea, and that's exactly what they did here, because the effects here are so kick-ass. And speaking of kick-ass, this is the movie that launches the Kane Hodder era of Friday the 13th. As most of you know, Kane Hodder is the only actor to play Jason more than once, playing him 4 times in 4 consecutive movies. Granted, he wasn't given the best hand in terms of the quality of the movies he got to be in, but for this first outing, he really made a great case for himself as Jason. Though Kane Hodder was never my favorite Jason, honestly, he still put a stamp on the character that is entirely respectable to me. He gives a real performance under that hockey mask. After suffering so much abuse at the hands of people half his age, Jason Voorhees has gotten royally pissed, and Kane Hodder totally embodies that. Maybe that's another reason why I never really noticed how lackluster the kills were. Kane Hodder is such a vengeful force on screen that he makes the kills visceral in their own way. Jason's resurrection is hokey, yes, I'll admit that, but at least it's not a coincidence that he gets reawakened around the same time that this telepathic girl shows up. The writers of this movie really tried with the telepathic angle. They really tried to make it convincing and plausible, and their efforts were not wasted in my opinion. Maybe you think the telekinesis angle is stupid, and you might have a point, but be damned if it doesn't culminate in one of the most badass, most spectacular, and just sheerly entertaining set pieces of this entire franchise. I mean, they go for broke here, and Tina proves herself to be perhaps the most formidable final girl in slasher movie history. And I love the way her powers are getting stronger and stronger throughout the course of the film, so that not only is this a great climax, but it's a satisfying arc for her character. Compare the climax of this movie with the lackluster scenes of Jason stalking and killing people, and you can see that director John Carl Buechler's heart wasn't in the Jason aspect of this movie. He was really in it for the telekinesis stuff, for the Tina stuff. Rewatching this movie, I could better understand why fans don't like this movie that much, because Jason is more of a nondescript bad guy in this movie. I mean, they don't really utilize his characterization, his lore, his mythos, to the extent that other entries have. And I get that frustration. I'm a fan of this character. I love his mythos. I love his backstory. But at the same time, if you're going to introduce this interesting plot element, and if you're going to introduce this really compelling character, and if you really commit to that idea, I don't think it's a glaring issue of this movie that Jason is more in the background. And to all of you who are bothered by the fact that Jason is more in the background, don't watch this as a Jason movie. Watch this as a monster movie, as a telekinesis movie, maybe even a superhero movie, and you might be more entertained than you would have thought. So guys, those are my thoughts on The New Blood. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Like if you want, subscribe if you want, and join me next time when we discuss the fucking movie. Join me next time when we talk about Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan.